And now for our feature presentation.
Ladies and gentlemen, may I have your attention, please?
You're listening to Straight Talk with Dean and Mark. Call in to join the conversation at 646-668-8393.
Welcome to Straight Talk with Dean and Mark. It's the six-man Dean Geronimo in the studio with Mark Lee, and we welcome you to yet another exciting episode of our show. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Straight Talk with Dean and Mark. It's the six-man Dean Geronimo. And I'm waiting for my man Mark Lee to hit the studio, so bear with us and we'll be right back in just 1 second. And just
I'm
like
here.
that, all right, there we go. It's Straight Talk with Dean and Mark. Welcome back to another exciting episode. It's the six-man Dean Geronimo. And from NJ to NC, as always, I'm in the studio right now with Mark Lee. So, Mark, tell me what's good in your neck of the woods, my brother.
Well, it's been a busy things going on this particular weekend. We were jumping. We were having a good old time. But it was good connecting with some old friends, some new friends, and things of that nature. But I actually, on Friday, we had UNCF in town. UNCF was doing a activity where they were trying to raise some money. Of course, they honored on this particular time. They were honoring Shaw, and that was at the Haycock Heritage Center. But they were over there, and they had some kids from Hillside who did a powerful presentation, like a theatrical presentation about power and getting out there to vote and doing all of that kind of important things. And how that's still important even these days. It was about activism and things of that nature. So I was really very impressed by the play. I've actually seen it before, but they did a great job with that. And then on Saturday, my dad had some artwork at the Natcher. It was part of a group of folks who were doing all kinds of various photography. So my dad, one of his longtime friends, who's also a friend of mine, Leah Sopsey, as well as another buddy of mine, Titus Higgins and David Anderson, and a whole host of photographers did these really powerful photographs. So I had been telling Pops that I was going to go by and see those pictures, but had yet to do it. So, before they got out of there, because they left on Sunday, I figured I better go ahead and do that good thing that a solid son will do, and stopped on over there and checked it out. So that was a real good thing that I did on Saturday. And later on that afternoon, went to the Washington Duke Inn. They were having a presentation about an event that happened 50 years ago. 50 years ago on Duke campus, some of the African-American students took over the Allen building, and they did it again in 2016, but they were complaining then, and I think they were even complaining now about some of the injustices that were going on. There were only a few of the African-American students back in 69, so they took it over and held it in siege back during those radical 60s, but some of the people were still there. The guy that got me at the Marquette, who you've heard me mention, like when we had Ruben and some other people on, Howard Fuller, he was involved in that back in 69, so he was there, so I got a chance to see Howard. Seen him a couple of times in Durham over the last few years, but did get a chance to visit, see him speak, and as always, he gave some dynamic things and put things in social context. He's always talking about convergence of interest. So he's saying that, we can make change, but we have to find out how it converges with the other party's interests in order for real change to happen. That's one of his theories that sounds like it's a very good and effective theory. So he talked about that, and he quoted Frantz Fanon and some other interesting people. So there was definitely some interesting lectures, and got a chance to hear from some of the people that I did not know who were taking over that building. So that was in the lecture before. So he was in one lecture, which was about activism then and now. So there were some activists that were actually from 3 generations. And we talked about this on our show, with the different ways of activism and how it plays out. But there was an activist from the current folks that are getting ready to graduate in the next year or two. There was some that was, I think one gentleman was graduated back in the 90s, and then there was, of course, those from the that Howard represented and others represented that were like in the 60s and the 70s. But we're talking 3 generations of activism, talking about how they can bridge those gaps of age and gender and race and different other things, but bridge those gaps and actually make some positive change. And And the last thing I was going to say, and I'll see what you got to say about this, but I did watch on Tuesday bits and pieces. I won't stomach so much of it because, it's a lot of lies, a lot of reactionary talk in my mind. But I did watch a little bit of that person that's occupying the states in Chocolate City right now. And then I heard the comeback from Miss Stacey Abrams, and I thought that she did an elegant job in her comments. I mean, they only give the rebuttal like about 10 or 15 minutes, but in those time frame that she had, she was very eloquent and definitely got across the point that we're not putting up with this BS. So I thought that was some very powerful messages that she gave on that particular Tuesday. And on a lighter note, as I'm just thinking about it, got to give a shout out to my Marquette Warriors. They did hit 20 wins, beat Villanova, one of them teams up there in your neck of the woods in the Northeast. They came to Milwaukee and they had them up by 15. They tried to make a run, but they did what you're supposed to do and did a couple of defensive stops and got away with the win. So right now, when I looked at the projections, I think we're being projected as a number 3 seed in the when the tournament bids come out in the Final Fours in April, so the bids should be out sometime next month. So I'm feeling good about my team. I'm feeling like we might be able to make a run this year. Who knows? Maybe this is the year of a championship. We haven't had one since before I got to college, so we haven't had one since '77. So maybe this is the year of some changes. And we got one superstar, and we got some other players that are not bad either. We got 3 or 4 players that average double figures. So I think we've got at least a shot at making some noise.
You know what? Speaking of year changes, man, we have to figure out, I guess, as a people too, how we are going to move forward. Again, I always say this: everybody is not meant to take this ride, but for those of us that are, there's a lot to be learned from the generations that came before us, because right now we are not doing it effectively. So we need to figure out how to, get to the table so that we can sit at the table. We're going to hear some things that we definitely don't want to hear, but at the same time, if we don't get to the table, all we're doing is making noise out in the parking lot. So,
I've said that before. I did a comment about that once before at a speech that I was giving or talking to somebody at the Carolina Theater. And I was talking about how, if you're sitting there and just doing things without an action plan, then you're just making noise and you're not really doing anything. We were actually talking about in the sense of the cultural landscape and business and things of that nature. But the same can be applied to the political landscape. People give the young lady protest a lot of slack for making some very powerful statements. I, for one, have no problem with some of the statements that she's making, and I think that she's doing a very admirable job, and I'm hoping that we can get her on our podcast in the near future. I've already sent her out a couple of invitations via Twitter and some other avenues, but I definitely would love to have her on because I think that she's definitely a very progressive young lady, and she is a young lady. She thinks definitely in that under 40 category, but, when he made that comment about America will never be a socialist country, you could tell that he was clearly directing that at people like her and people like Bernie, but they were like, look, we're not asking that. We're not asking to come Cuba, but at the same time, some of the things that Obama was trying to bring about are very much needed, and some of those people may consider that to be socialistic leaning, whether that's whether that's some health care that's not necessarily on the market level kind of plan, or whether that's some things that we want to do in the prison system, or whether that's some other things. Those are just positive changes that can be made, and we don't need to be throwing labels. But he's good at throwing labels. He threw a label at Elizabeth, kind of, he does acknowledge part of her native heritage. I don't think that she ever says that she's 100% native, but he tries to make mocking claims about some of her things that she says with her native heritage and things of that nature. But I think that she has also been one that is not going to just sit idly by while he throws barbs without it coming back with some comebacks of her own. In fact, I saw earlier today that she told him that, better be quiet because he might not be a free man in the year 2020, much less even president.
Well, you know what? Call it what you want, but if we make you that uncomfortable, hopefully we'll make you uncomfortable enough in what you have been comfortable in doing so that you will want to help work towards some otherwise positive change. Because if not, we just going to be spinning circles. Going in circles does absolutely nothing. You know what I mean? So We got somebody at the door.
A couple of guys, but I'm hoping that this is Bessie Elmore because I think I've lined up about 3 or 4 guests, so we might be able to bail 3 or 4 times. But let's see if this is Bessie on the line right now, or Jaki Shelton Green, or one of the other guests that I've invited.
We about to find out right now. You know what I mean? Good evening. Thank you for calling Straight Talk with Dean and Mark. You are on the line. Who do we have the pleasure of speaking with this evening?
This is Bessie Elmore, the founder of Straight Talk Support Group Transitional House. Good evening.
Good evening.
Good evening, Bessie. I am so glad that you were able to call. As I was telling Dean when I booked you, I was like, look, we're going to have Straight Talk talking to Straight Talk because our program is Straight Talk, and it's all about trying to get folks that are coming out of the system. And I know, Dean, you work in the system. You worked in it for a number of years up there in New Jersey, but Bessie, it was your son, correct, that was in the system for a number of years, and it was kind of the impetus for why you created this program. And if you would, share with our listeners a little bit about how that came about and some of what you're doing.
Yes, my son was incarcerated here in North Carolina for 25 years. And my daughter and I came to North Carolina only to avenge him and get him out of prison and get on back with our lives. But as it turned out, it took us 25 years to do that. My son was sentenced to natural life in prison, and it means just that, natural life. But he's been home now going on 4 years. So with all the information that I had obtained, everything I'd learned, I had no other choice but to give back because God had given me and my son and daughter so much. We were bound to give back. So I started the support group 2013, March of 2013, and then I opened up a transitional house. It'll be a year next month. It used to be the Federal Transitional House in Durham, and now it's Straight Talk's house. And we have the capacity to house 21 men because we don't house women, but 21 men coming home from prison who want to make some change in their lives, and we offer an array of programs, and we still have our support group.
Well, if you would, because not all of our listeners are familiar, and I'm not all that familiar with it. I know because I've done some stuff with you in the past before. But would you share a little bit about, with not going into full detail, but how we got caught up in the penal system and how y'all knew that it was an injustice and where y'all were coming from? Because I know y'all are not originally from North Carolina.
Right. Well, my son came here under 2 pretenses. One was to go to college, to go to St. Aug, and then he was involved in some drug activity, selling drugs with some friends of his from New Jersey. And on a particular night, there was a shooting, and all the guys pointed the finger at him, some of his best friends. And he went to jail. There was a trial, and they found him guilty, and the judge sentenced him to natural life. And with everything my daughter and I did our own little investigation, it just seemed so an injustice because of the evidence that they didn't have and a lot of other things. We became little detectives of our own, but unfortunately, it was not enough evidence to get back in court. So we had to continue on looking for, well, what is it that we can do to get him out of prison? And like I said, it took us 25 years to do that, but we were successful.
Wow. What do you think is the biggest misconception people have about folks that are coming out of prison? Because I'm sure there's a lot of misconceptions people have. One, I'm sure everybody thinks everybody in prison is guilty. We know that that's not the case because of things like the Innocence Project, or there have been people that have been spent, like you said, a number of years in prison that were either not guilty or not as guilty as they were originally charged to have been. So I was just wondering, in your assessment, what are some of the other misconceptions that just the general public has about folks that are coming out of the prison system?
Well, it's the stigma of being in prison. It's the stigma of being black and in prison or brown and in prison, and that everyone that's in prison, like you said, is guilty. Yes, they're guilty of something. We all are. but not necessarily